inside the mind of the worst mass killer in American history,
and
John Wayne
entertain the
Gacy.
children there. And we didn't entertain them with handcuffs or anything like that. All we used was balloon animals and small toys and stuff like that.
Killing 33 innocent people and destroying
vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
I feel sorry for the victims' families because they have not gotten justice in this case.
Once again, Gacy is set to receive a lethal injection at 1 minute after midnight.
It's a weird element when you see someone so successful, happy, charismatic, enthusiastic about life in itself, just what seems to be a joyful person that looks like they want to help other people and that you feel comfortable around. But in one's life, many secrets take place in the dark, to where it takes years for light to slip through. Gacy, is he the worst that we've seen in the world of torture and death? There's been many like him that kidnap boys right from their home, their neighborhood, friends. But Gacy's different. His charismatic personality grabs our attention, and the dark side of him that exists, that he denied and took to the grave, excites us. This is the death of John Gacy.
If you believe you've lived your life the right way, then you do not have nothing to fear. I've had confession, I have communion, and I am at peace with myself.
John's story has taken the nation to the ultimate high of interest in sealing the deal of true crime business. The media can't get enough. Newspapers, reporters, even down to the neighbors of John himself. Everyone's captivated about a middle-aged man, 37, who's not murdering women, but young boys. They've never seen it before. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people then. Surprisingly, John himself is not being seen by the public that much, besides a few mugshots. It's mostly the pictures and video of John's house, with day by day, week by week, of bodies being found in it, and people saying and asking each other, have they found any more? Many people in John's community already know him as a successful businessman, but the world is starting to learn at that moment that John just wasn't some crazy bum. He broke all the narratives and ideas of what a serial killer was and could be. His company, PDM Contractors, was responsible for building many houses, sheds, concrete pads that still stand and lay today. Many of the hands that built them would be some of Gacy's victims as well. You have to understand that Gacy was an extremely popular person. He threw cookouts, attended dinner parties, and had a circle of people around him that trusted him and looked up to him. He had accomplished the American dream by his 30s, but by the later half was living on death row. After a week of losing his mind, admitting to his lawyer that he's killed dozens of young men, burying them in his crawl space, then having his home searched by police, being linked to missing boys around town, and finally arrested on December 21st, 1978. Days before that Christmas, John would be put into jail. The evidence immediately would start piling up against him. The searches reveal elements of torture, devices, chains, whips, elements to hold someone against their will. They also find men's jewelry, watches, necklaces that they soon find out are keepsakes from the victims, along with many keys to houses around town in the neighborhood of young boys that never came home. The smell of rot is consuming the house of John. Stains of blood in the back bedroom of the house, right on the floor, where a picture of a clown looks off near the bed. The same bed and the same look from the clown that many young men saw while being assaulted and tied up for days on end. The hatch is found that leads to the underbelly of the house, where eventually all the lost boys are found. On the 23rd, 2 days later, John is indicted on murder. By the time it's all said and done, becoming the first human being that's ever been charged with that large of amount of victims in the United States all at once. As a parent, it's a horrifying thought to think that your child, in the best years of their life, youthful and trusting, were assaulted, tortured, and murdered, and their bodies being even more demoralized by being buried underneath the killer's house for years, rotting and decaying right beside each other into the ground, plucked away by maggots, worms. When you dig into the history and new stories, evidence of John, there's many new stories that have emerged over the years. It's believed now, with the number of victims being 33, that it could be as much as 60 or 70, even in very recent years, new victims being identified, still to this day. At that moment in time, John's house is being ripped apart, saws, hammers, nails, flooring, ripped out, some kept for evidence, and most tossed away. There's never really been anything like this in history documented. All the world can do is watch. Items keep coming out of the house. Many go to the police station where they stay, still to this day, and some that are more well known are now hanging in museums where they're seen by many people on a daily basis. Even the suit that John wears to court still exists today, every now and then seeing the light of day again. The lust of keeping personal items of John goes deep, and more than likely, he has more memorabilia from private collectors to museums than any other serial killers we've seen in history. By April of '79, John's house is torn down. There's not even a question to keep it. It's a biohazard. Even most of the dirt under the house will have to be taken away and replaced. The plot is left empty for some time, till a new home will take its place. The only part of the house that remains is the opening to the crawl space, where all the boys were dragged, their lifeless bodies. It now sits in a back room with police evidence until it finds its new home. John goes through his trial and pleads his innocence. In the very beginning of his trial, John says on 3 different separate occasions that he's having a heart attack, falling to his knees, needing medical help, stopping the trial, but getting everyone's attention, whether he saw it for sympathy or just having the spotlight on him even more. When people see John for the first time in the courts, they see the 2 sides of John. The one side of him was the hard-working, smart businessman, charismatic, polite, able to talk his way in and out of conversations. Just a normal guy from what it seemed. Maybe even a little quirky and annoying at times. But the other side of John, the part that terrified grown men, was the fact that John was able to lie so easy, trick and deny, manipulate people, completely denying the involvement in killing young men and torturing them. Even though the evidence is so overwhelming, it's laughable. John's personality is competitive, not letting anyone have the upper hand over him. Not to mention that John denies he's a gay man. On March 13th, 1980, John would be sent to death row at the Menard Correctional Center in Illinois, waiting over a decade to die. When John is asked about other serial killers, such as Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, he says that he's not in the same category as them, even though people like to put him in that category. He doesn't like them. He doesn't understand why people are doing this. People just have the wrong idea about who he is. John seeks appeals, trying to find a new trial and get off death row. His life in prison is unique, to say the least. It's said that other prisoners are jealous of him, his fame and special attention, but more than anything that you hear about the most is that John has his own color TV. There's still mixed information on how John had so many privileges, more than most inmates. But John uses his business skills in prison as well, making sure he has snacks, bathroom luxuries, soaps, shampoos, basic daily household elements. But John does the most unique move a convicted serial killer has ever done. John starts to paint, and he's selling the paintings from his own creation. Many of the paintings are random thoughts and likes of John himself, from Disney to Elvis, skulls. But the most popular one that's sought after by collectors is John's own creation, Pogo. Pogo is the clown that John acted as. There's no doubt that John was acting as Pogo when he also killed victims. But when John talks of Pogo, he talks of dressing up as a clown, going to schools, children's hospitals, trying to make them laugh. Paintings of Pogo still exist today. Private collectors hold them today. At first, John's paintings were not a hot commodity. Even after John's passing, there would be a public auction selling over 40 paintings of his, the first one being canceled due to lack of interest, although later, one man would buy 25 pieces of the collection, or he simply just set them on fire because he hated John Gacy. No one would have ever guessed, maybe not even John himself, that his paintings would be highly sought after for the collectors and the underbelly of the true crime lovers. While John spends many of his years in prison painting, he's also making friends on the outside. He writes letters, inviting people to come see him, writing back and forth. John even has a girlfriend on the outside that he writes to. He sits on death row for over a decade, turning into an old man. All the while, John runs out of pills and knows his days are ending. His sister stays close to his side. She says that she loves her brother, but hates his crimes. The only person that seems to believe that John is innocent is his own mother, and pleads her son's innocence until she loses her mind and eventually dies. As John gets closer to his last moments, he does start to talk about the victims in his own way, making up theories and excuses on why the bodies were under his house. Some of the victims were self-defense, some he doesn't know about. Everyone knows John is lying, but goes along with it. In December of 1993, an execution date was set for John to die on May 10th, and immediately people that have forgotten about John over the decade are about to be reminded. The news medias fly to John, seeking interviews, calling him, anything they can, and people once again, from the old generation to the new generation, are learning about John Wayne Gacy again. Right towards the end of John's life, he starts a 900 number to where John has set it up to where people can call and listen to him plead his case. People are charged by the minute. When people call, they hear John talk of really nothing they say. It's mostly rambling. It's really John just making up his own theories and statements. The whole situation ends up going nowhere. It's just another remarkable act that John pulls off in prison. The last few moments of John's life before execution, he's flown to Statesville Penitentiary in Illinois, right outside of Chicago. John has been on death row for 14 years and still not publicly confessing to murders. May 9th is John's last whole day alive on earth. He spends the day talking with friends. Remarkably, he has many people coming to see him, private friends that don't want to be known publicly. Many of them are John's neighbors and old business partners that he's known for years. They talk, they laugh, they hug, and say their goodbyes. The other person that's right beside John's side is his sister. John's relationship with her is very interesting. She still talks of her brother to this day, saying that she loved him, but was devastated and horrified to see what he was having to go through. But she knew he was guilty. John is set to be executed that night at 12 a.m., going into May 10th. Unlike some people that are about to be executed, John eats his last meal, and it's a big one set for a king. He has his favorite meal, KFC chicken, along with cookies, french fries, pizza. It's a huge assortment of food. John sees his sister one last time. They hug, kiss, and take a picture, and they tell one another that they love the other one. Outside the prison, people are selling t-shirts, posters, cheering and celebrating the execution of John. The majority of people are happy to see John executed, and really none of them out there have any relations to any of the victims. They're just onlookers. Mixed in the crowd are people also protesting against the death penalty. John's execution is one of the last big executions of the century that's televised and made into a spectacle that brings in massive revenue, where we see mobs of people chanting and cheering. At around 11 p.m. that night, John would be brought into the execution chamber. It's said that he can hear the chanting and yelling. As John is now in the death chamber, the chamber itself is really nothing special. It's a small room with a hospital gurney. Most animal hospitals have better looks. John props up on the gurney and lays down. He's not crying. He's not showing sadness. John's tied down. The needles are inserted into his veins. And with that, he's asked if he has any last words. Some people say that John said nothing, and some say that John replied with "kiss my ass." John's execution is a bit longer than expected. It's now midnight when it gets underway. On May 10th, the 3-drug lethal injection begins. The first drug shoots John right into his veins, making him fall asleep instantly. John closes his eyes and maybe even dreams for a little bit, his last dreams. The second drug is an extreme muscle relaxer, essentially making John go limp, relaxing his body. While it starts to flow, it clogs. It takes 15 to 20 minutes to reset it and get it working again. The third drug is the one that stops John's heart. At 12:58 a.m. on May 10th, at 52 years old, John Wayne Gacy is gone from the world. When John's body is taken away to the morgue, his skull would be cut open and his brain would be cut out. Doctors wanting to see if it shows any signs of why John was the way he was. His scan, though, it brings back no clues as to why he was successful in life or a deviant killer. It's just a regular brain. Still to this day, John's brain is kept with a private collector, sitting in a jar. They also take vials upon vials of John's blood to keep, to study, to finish out that night. Many of the victims' families who were there to watch John pass give their last words on the matter. They hug, they cry. It's a somber moment for sure. When it's all wrapped up and done, John's dead, his victims are dead, and you truly ask for what? Just for one man's sadistic moments of pleasure, taking the lives of young men. The last thoughts, screams, and yells of the victims must have been more than anyone is more than willing to hear. And sadly, they'll never get a second chance. John's story was not for the faint of heart. He left as many things: a multiple husband, father, businessman, a friend to many people, an active brother, but also a vicious serial killer that loved torture and the brutality that goes along with it. John Wayne Gacy, the killer, will never forget.
To my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies, or 28 bodies were found on the property. 27 of them under the house.
And the rest?
One was under the driveway, one was under the garage. So that makes a total of 29.
Okay.